Today we're going to briefly be mentioning some notes on this U.S.-Israel war with Iran. And we've discussed this before in previous videos that we've done on Iran. We knew this was the direction that it was going to be, that it was trending towards. And so I'm sure if you haven't been living under Iraq, you know that 2 days ago, Israel launched airstrikes on Iran's military infrastructure, nuclear facilities, etc. They carried out assassination attempts against some of their high-level military commanders as well. And we'll get into some of the recent developments since this war has started. But what I wanted to do today was to get into the bigger issue of a bigger discussion about how Trump and Witkoff in reality never negotiated in good faith with Iran, and how the negotiations themselves were part of a larger plan with the state of Israel to force regime change in Iran. And this claim isn't anything new. Israeli officials have made this claim that Trump's his negotiations with Iran were part of a larger plan to deceive the Iranians. And so we're just going to cover some of my thoughts on that. And there is a groundswell of an opinion that's trending in that direction. I'm sure that probably won't be hearing much about that, but that's largely because it is kind of a controversial position to take because of actually how disturbing it is if the administration took this route in negotiations with Iran. And again, if you've been paying attention to these negotiations, to the statements coming out of the administration and out of Israel, it isn't too difficult to draw the conclusion that I've drawn. Now, negotiations weren't taking place because Trump wanted a diplomatic resolution to Iran's nuclear program. He wants the complete destruction of their nuclear program. And there's been a lot of back and forth about this, where Witkoff and Trump and Rubio say one thing one day, and then they change their mind the next. One day they want to allow them to enrich to civilian grade level. The next day they want no enrichment. They want all of their centrifuges gone. They want any enrichment to take place outside of Iran. Lots of contradictory statements. We've talked about this. And I want to emphasize that difference between diplomatic resolutions similar to like the JCPOA related to how much they can enrich and the complete destruction of their program, right? Trump doesn't believe they should be enriching anything. And so there's a difference there. And one of the reasons that's important is because it takes us back to the very beginning, 2 months ago, when Trump laid down what he wanted to do. He said, we're going to give Witkoff and the Iranians 60 days to come up with a deal. And if they don't come up with a deal, then all hell's going to break loose, essentially. And to me, that doesn't sound like a great overture when it comes to these kinds of negotiations. It sounds like an ultimatum. Basically, hey, we can talk for 60 days, but if you don't agree with what I'm putting down on paper, we're just gonna bomb you. We're gonna, in conjunction with Israel, we're gonna take out your nuclear sites, or potentially your government. We'll get into that in a moment. So I don't believe he wanted a diplomatic resolution to their nuclear program. He wanted their nuclear program again destroyed. And Israel wants regime change, right? And so you can see how you really can't have one without the other. Iran's red line, they're not going to allow the administration to cross their red line, which is we're going to enrich. They're not going to get rid of the facilities and the infrastructure that allows them to enrich the uranium that could potentially make bombs and this kind of thing. And Israel doesn't want the regime there at all, right? So if you try to take out their nuclear program, basically you're going to have to take the whole regime out. Israel is just basically taking it to its logical conclusion. And so you could see how these objectives between Trump and Israel, they dovetail. And they align very well. So the negotiations were really just theater, right? And why? For the following reasons: to give the impression to the non-interventionist wing of Trump's base that he wasn't being led by the nose by Israel and the hawks in Congress and his cabinet. And the truth is that no, the non-interventionist wing doesn't have too much leeway relative to the administration and the decisions that are made when it comes to the question of the Middle East. But there are strong voices, strong non-interventionist voices in the media, some within his administration, but Tulsi Gabbard, Tucker Carlson in the media. There is a component, a non-interventionist component, that Trump is wanting to keep complacent, right? And also, the second reason is the negotiations were theater was to lull Iran into complacency, right? More talks were scheduled for this weekend, so I'm sure Iran never conceived that, or, not going to say they couldn't conceive of it happening, but I'm sure they may have weren't thinking, oh, well, it's likely that we're going to get bombed, even though we've got negotiations scheduled for this weekend. So a lot of people believed that he wanted to genuinely continue the negotiations with Iran and eventually reach a settlement. I don't, for the following reasons. In their the administration's negotiating history, right? Before Trump came into office, we've talked about this before. He had a special envoy, Steve Witkoff, negotiate and broker a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. And when the second phase of that ceasefire was supposed to go into place, the Israelis reneged on it. And you didn't hear a peep out of the administration, right? They were okay with it. Witkoff was okay with it. And of course, they made attempts to get the negotiations back on the rail, but the damage was done. Israel decided they were going to cut water, electricity, aid to the Gaza Strip, start bombarding certain areas of the Gaza Strip again, start arming Palestinians in the Gaza Strip to help them fight Hamas and all of these different things. That's the damage that was done. And so they weren't serious about that ceasefire. That ceasefire was brokered as basically it was brokered because Trump wanted that political win before he got inaugurated. And the Israelis gave it to him, and then he gave them a free hand after the first phase of negotiations expired. And so, is that someone that you can you trust this administration when it comes down to these negotiations to kind of stick with the letter that they've endorsed and agreed to, that they've brokered? No. Now, the framework of these negotiations, I don't know who starts off, like I just said a moment ago, saying starts off a proposal for negotiations saying you have 60 days to sign a resolution. If you don't, you'll cease to be a country. We'll bomb you. We'll all of these threats if you don't sign a deal. I don't know. It's interesting to me. It's almost like if I was sitting down with somebody trying to buy a house from the person and we're negotiating price. And I said, look, you have 7 days to reach a deal with me, or I'm just going to kill you and take your house. Right? I'm sure that person probably wouldn't want to negotiate with me, but perhaps the Iranians felt that Trump was approaching these negotiations in good faith. The provocative language is the next thing, and the contradictory posture that we've talked about before that the U.S. continued to display, the delegation continued to display. When you're thinking about these 5 rounds of negotiations that happened and everything that was said in between, and you can, if you're one of those people that want to believe that this is just part of, the art of the deal for Trump, that's your prerogative. But, one day they can enrich, the next day they need to get rid of it. The next day it's okay if they enrich to a certain level. The next day, They need to get rid of enrichment, their centrifuges, their missile program, everything, right? All of this language, it points to something. Many of what serious proposals were really put forward, except maybe the one that Trump recently sent after the fifth round of negotiations that Iran didn't even have a chance to respond to formally. Many contradictions, right? And a lot of hostile language, both from Israel and the administration. A lot of confusion. A lot of this is meant to sow confusion. Now, the next point is if Trump did want to continue negotiations, why not just demand that Israel stop before they launched this attack on Iran? Trump had a phone call with Netanyahu on Monday, and Netanyahu told him what he was going to be doing. And if Trump really was serious about these negotiations, you'd think that he'd probably, tell him, don't do that, make it public, go out and give a statement or something. Well, I know we don't live in a perfect world, but make a statement. Go to the American people and say, look, I've advised them not to do this. They're wanting to do it. They're jeopardizing our negotiations. Nothing. We heard nothing. We heard a lot of, again, just grumbling from him. Oh, the day before Israel might strike Iran. Iran better make a deal. Does that sound like somebody that wants to talk and negotiate, or does that sound like somebody who's handing you an ultimatum, like sign the deal or this is going to happen? Statements that Trump made after the bombing started, taking full responsibility and saying, look, we knew, we're okay with it. We just want them to make a deal, right? He didn't want to continue negotiations. He just wanted them to sign the proposal that he sent forward, right? If he wanted them to continue negotiations, he would have done everything in his power to ensure that Israel was reined in. This isn't what Israel is doing right now. That's not something that just takes a day. That takes months to plan, right? Years. I'm saying that Trump knew for, you know what I'm saying. It's not something they just came up with yesterday, right? To carry out these strikes. The next point, if Trump and his team were amateurish enough to believe that these strikes would be leverage in these negotiations and these talks, then the cynicism that I felt about these talks, like the Russo-Ukrainian negotiations, it's justified. Now, he couldn't have achieved this leverage that we're talking about, bomb them back to the table, this kind of situation, because if Trump is just looking at dismantling their negotiations and Israel is looking to disrupt the entire country and thereby foment regime change, you guys have two different objectives. The leverage that you're using, you want them at the table. Israel wants them gone. Your attack dog wants them gone. So that kind of leverage isn't going to work, right? It kind of reminds me of Yugoslavia back in the 90s. I read a book a while back by Richard Holbrooke, and he was talking about how during the war between Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and the old Yugoslavia or Serbia, when Milosevic was in power, Holbrooke allowed the UN to bomb Serbian positions in Bosnia in order to move on negotiations. It was kind of like leverage. That's not something that couldn't work if you're talking about changing a military situation and already, a hot war, changing facts on the ground, a military situation in order to gain leverage in negotiations. That's something very different than Trump talking to these people in Iran for the past 2 months and then turning around and just assisting Israel in bombing them in order to bring them back to the table. Right, unexpectedly allowing them to be bombed, hoping that they'll come back to the table, when Israel's objective is to see the regime collapse. In the end, though, is Trump really wanting to talk more? It doesn't appear like that. he's saying a lot. He says a lot of things, right? He says a lot of very different things, let us say. I'll try to be charitable. And the last point I'll make about this, Trump doesn't trust the Iranians. Trump has had a problem with Iran since his first term. Trump has got the kind of animosity against Iran that George Bush had against Iraq. Okay? If that can give you an idea of where things are potentially going. He thinks that they tried to assassinate him. You know, if you look back again at statements that he's made in his first term, and then, of course, the fact that he whacked like one of their senior IRGC commanders and this kind of thing, he doesn't trust them. Doesn't help their cause. Right? And many are going out of their way. This is the last I'll say about it, and then we'll just kind of hit the actual story here. But many are going out of their way to blame it, who are paying attention. They're blaming the deep state, neoconservative Zionists for this new U.S. intervention in the Middle East, and once more giving the impression that Trump has no agency, right? That he's captured by the swamp. This is a lot of things that we heard during the first term. Hey, it's his advisors, it's the people around him, it's Congress, it's the judges. You know, Trump had the power to get on the television and make his case against Israel doing this and against assisting Israel doing this. But he didn't do it. Right? That's the person that I think the voters wanted, not somebody that they could just make excuses for. So ultimately, I think he's spoken loud and clear through his statements and his actions over the past 2 months. Actually, we can go back to when he got inaugurated, or we can go back further than that, about what his objectives are. I think he's fallen right into line with the objectives of all the aforementioned parties, the neocons, the Zionists, the Israelis, their government, all of them. It reminds me a little bit of a statement that that Trump made last year on Fox when he was talking about the war between Russia and Ukraine. His approach to these negotiations. And what he said was, I think he was interviewed by Bret Baier, and what he said was that I want the war to end between the Russians and the Ukrainians, but if Putin isn't willing to sign a deal, then we're going to give Ukraine everything that they want. That sounds more like an ultimatum. Just like this situation. Hey, if they don't sign a deal, we're just going to, bomb the hell out of them. Right? And so there's some similarities there. If this is the way that Trump approaches negotiations, then then I'm definitely questioning his competency. It's a little disturbing. But we'll see. We'll see how this unfolds. A lot of people are kind of cheering right now because Israel is requesting bunker busting munitions so that they can go after Iran's facilities in Fordo. It's like I believe that's where their centrifuges are, and they're deep within a mountain. And Trump is saying no for now. He's also had a phone call with Putin related to this war, this newly started war. He recently, I think it was yesterday, had a phone call with Putin, and they both said they want the war to end. But we know that Trump wants all wars to end. He wants all the dying to stop. But we're not too sure how he plans on facilitating any of those things, even up until now. And maybe if you're in that camp that believes it's all part of the plan, all the more power to you. But the story, on the 13th, Israel launched a wide-ranging attack on Iran's nuclear program and military leadership. And this was early Friday when everything started. Israel said the attack targeted Iran's nuclear program and other military sites as well as Iranian military commanders and nuclear scientists. Dozens of planes wrapped up the first wave of attack before dawn on Friday. President Trump said on social media that he remains committed to finding a diplomatic solution, but that Iran must give up the possibility of a nuclear weapon. And again, that just means the facilities need to be completely destroyed, right? That's really what that boils down to. Whether it's 5 years from now, 10 years from now, they're just wanting the entire thing dismantled, which again is equivalent to just saying, "Hey, we'll depose you if you don't," which is what we're seeing right now, because that's their red line. They're not going to give up their ability to enrich, and because this was always an impossibility, and Trump knew it. Again, and maybe I left this out. I may have said it, but this is another reason why I said these negotiations were a farce, because in the end, that was always their red line, right? There was some filler in between the 5 negotiations that took place where Witkoff was saying, well, we might let them enrich civilian grade 3.62 or 67%. And then he went back on their word, and they went right back to their maximalist demands, you know? So these were always, it was already set from the beginning, right? That these maximalist demands would never be accepted, and some kind of military action was going to be taken. So it was always there. Rubio said they weren't involved in the strikes, and of course, this is just from the article. Bibi had the phone call with Netanyahu, had the phone call with Trump on Monday. Since then, of course, Iran has retaliated. Israel has retaliated. It's ongoing today on Sunday, this 15th of June. And it's probably going to be ongoing for a while. Israel has said basically that this is a weeks-long process, what we're doing. And what they're doing is they're trying to sow enough unrest and chaos to create a situation where the people in Iran are going to rise up against their government. So more news here. U.S. negotiations with Iran aimed at curbing their nuclear program. For months, Trump had regularly signaled his desire to give diplomacy a chance. On Thursday, Trump said he didn't think an Israeli attack was imminent. Yeah, right. In pressing for nuclear talks with Iran earlier this year, Trump initially suggested a 2-month time frame for the negotiations to succeed. So we're just kind of going through a review of the process that led us to where we are right now. And if you want more in-depth military coverage of what's going on the ground, and, the back and forth, there are other programs that could do that. I'm just giving my thoughts on the overall circumstances right now. It's disappointing because I have been following the negotiations. It's actually kind of discouraging to see or to know that this was a situation that was just likely all theater, and that this was always the plan. So these hostilities are going to likely continue, like I just said. Israel has said this operation could take weeks, and also it's about sowing instability. But color revolutions, like Israel is trying to foment or regime change, like this that Israel is trying to foment in Iran, typically have a robust ground game in order to be successful. That means NGOs and different nonprofit organizations infiltrate the country and work with opposition parties and civilians and establish sort of this civic infrastructure throughout the society. So the revolution comes from the ground up, the regime change moves upward. So you think back at the more sophisticated initiatives like, we were talking about Yugoslavia earlier, which is what likely Israel wants, a Balkanized Iran. Poland, of course, Ukraine, Georgia, these places. There was attempts in Belarus. And if you don't have that infrastructure, again, that NGO-funded civic infrastructure that's created on the ground, then regime change will look a lot like Afghanistan and Iraq, which is an indefinite forever war. which is what will be. This is the beginning of this kind of thing. This is a long-term commitment. I'll close by saying that. The U.S. is involved. Israel is involved. I mean, this is a long-term commitment. It doesn't take much for this to spill onto one of our bases in the Middle East, in Iraq or something like that. Some kind of accident. It's moments away. And I'm optimistic to a certain extent. Maybe it doesn't sound like this from this video, but it could fizzle out, right? But I'm not. I'm going to wait and see, and we'll be covering it more. It would be a miracle if within a week we aren't directly striking Iran, right? Because of something that could take place with these strikes, with them going back and forth as intensely as they have. So we'll see what happens. Anyways, that's it for me.